He said it so casually, like he was setting a boundary, not burning a bridge. "Mom, it's better if you don't come to family things anymore. It just makes things tense." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I drove home with his favorite pie still warm beside me and rewrote my will that same night. 30 years of holidays. 1,000 small kindnesses. Every room he ever slept in. Erased, as calmly as he'd erased me. He wanted distance. I gave it to him, in ink, in law, and in silence that would outlast us both. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Marion Duncan didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She didn't cry. She simply adjusted the foil over the still warm pie in her arms, shifted the wrapped gift under her elbow, and looked at her son like he was already someone else's. The backyard was full of laughter. Children's squeals rode the late summer air, mingling with the smoky sweetness of barbecue and the bass beat of a party playlist. Marion stood just beyond the property line, near the hydrangeas that lined the neighbor's garage, where the lawn met a low wooden fence. She'd worn her navy cardigan and the sandals with good soles. She always dressed decently for family things, even the ones she wasn't invited to. The gift was small, square, and carefully wrapped. Art pencils and a sketch pad for Benji. The pie was cherry, his favorite. From across the yard, Kyle noticed her. He hesitated before walking over, brushing past a folding table loaded with condiments and paper plates. His jaw tightened as he approached. His t-shirt was new, like he'd dressed to impress someone who wasn't her. "Mom," he said, stopping just inside the gate. The latch stayed closed. "What are you doing here?" Marion's eyes didn't flinch. "It's Benji's birthday." "I know," he said quickly. "But, look, we've talked about this." "No." "Kyle," she said, calm as still water. "You talked. I listened." He glanced back at the party. Rachel was watching them from near the grill, arms folded. Benji was nowhere in sight. Kyle leaned in slightly, his voice low and tight. "It's just not helpful when you show up like this. It creates tension. Rachel's stressed, and honestly, it's just easier for everyone if you stay out of these." There was no malice in his voice. That somehow made it worse. Marion didn't answer right away. She looked past him, at the clusters of balloons tied to patio chairs, at the banner strung unevenly over the garage, "Happy 15th, Benji," and then back at Kyle. The moment stretched. "I didn't come to make things harder," she said. "I came with pie." Kyle gave a weak shrug, almost apologetic, but the gate remained latched. "Okay," Marion said, and adjusted her grip on the pie. "I'll head back." She didn't offer him the gift. She didn't ask to say hello. She turned, walked away, and never once let the pie tilt. The sidewalk shimmered in the late afternoon heat. A lawn sprinkler sputtered nearby, catching the sun in its arc. As she passed a couple walking their dog, Marion gave them a gentle nod, polite but distant. Her back didn't bend. Her steps didn't slow. At home, her living room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. The air was cool from the ceiling fan ticking overhead. She placed the gift on the table without unwrapping it, then opened the pie tin and stared at it for a long while. She sat down slowly, her body aching in the quiet ways age creeps in. Knees stiff, shoulders sore from holding things that no one took. After a moment, she stood and walked to the small file cabinet near the bookshelf. She slid open the top drawer, where a white binder rested among utility bills and tax documents. Its spine was labeled, in neat handwriting, Estate, M. Duncan. She brought it to the kitchen table, opened to the first tabbed section, Beneficiaries, and flipped the page to Kyle's name. Typed, clean, all in order. Then, without hesitation, she slipped the paper free. The sound it made was barely louder than a breath. She folded it once, cleanly, and dropped it into the paper shredder beside her desk. The machine hummed, slicing through ink and history without pause. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves danced across the porch. Marian sat in silence, one hand resting on the binder, the other brushing crumbs from the table's edge. There would be no confrontation, no drama. She would not storm the party or leave voicemails. She would make her edits the same way she had lived her life, quiet, thorough, and final. And when the phone lit up with Kyle's name an hour later, no message, just a missed call, she let it fade to black without a second glance. The pie sat on the counter, its crust beginning to sag. Marian stood at the kitchen sink, hands resting on the edge like she needed the porcelain to hold her up. Outside, the neighborhood moved on. A delivery truck rumbled down the street, a dog barked behind the fence next door, and the wind rattled the wind chime she'd almost taken down last winter. She walked slowly to the landline, picking up the receiver with fingers that didn't shake. Each number pressed made a soft click, deliberate, quiet, final. When Angela answered, Marian didn't bother with small talk. "I need to revise some documents." There was a beat of silence, but not surprise. "We'll start with your will," Angela said calmly, "and go deeper from there." Marian didn't nod. She didn't need to. She simply hung up and went to the hall closet, reaching for the floral box marked Kyle. Dust puffed into the air when she opened it. The smell inside was paper and time. She took out every card, letter, and photo. She laid them out on the dining table like a forensic reconstruction. Years of birthdays, holidays, and obligations flattened into ink and glitter. Crayon drawings from kindergarten. A high school graduation note. "Thanks for everything, Mom." A typed Christmas letter. "We've been so busy, but we're grateful for your support." Each year the messages got shorter, stiffer, less hers. She read the last card twice. "Appreciate you thinking of Benji." No mention of the handmade quilt. No return call. Just a line, as if courtesy was a service she should be grateful to provide. By late morning, the door creaked open and Dina stepped inside with 2 large coffees and that knowing look she wore like a badge. "You ready?" she asked, setting the cups down. "Or still warming up?" Marian gestured to the table, now half covered in memory and evidence. "I was ready the moment he told me not to come." Dina pulled out a chair and sat. "You sure about this?" "I gave him 30 years of birthday dinners, clean sheets when he visited, and a place at my table every time. He gave me a fence." There was no bitterness in her voice, just precision, the kind that comes after the sting wears off and only shape remains. She opened a fresh legal pad and began writing. At the top of the page, beneficiary exclusion, no contact justification. Angela had once told her, "Be thorough, be factual, and leave nothing vague." Marian intended to be all 3. She wrote in careful, unshakable lines. Pattern of emotional distancing. Repeated exclusion from family gatherings. Absence of reciprocal care. Every sentence built a boundary, not of spite. Of self-respect. Dina read over her shoulder, nodding. "You're making it airtight." Marian didn't look up. "I'm making it honest." By early afternoon, the pie was still untouched. The sun had shifted low enough to cast long shadows across the carpet. Marian gathered the papers into a folder. One for Angela, one for herself, one for the fireproof safe. When they arrived at Angela's office the next morning, the space was quiet, the windows cracked to let in the river breeze. Angela didn't waste time with pleasantries. She flipped through Marian's folder, scanning each page with the kind of attention that only comes from seeing too many people regret what they hadn't written down. "You've already done the legwork," she said. "This isn't just a revision, it's a redirection." "That's the point," Marian replied. Angela closed the folder softly, like she was sealing something sacred. Then she looked Marian in the eye. "How far do you want this to go?" Marian didn't hesitate. "All the way." Angela nodded once and reached for her pen. The line had been drawn. Now they were putting it in ink. The pen moved without hesitation, not fast, not shaky, just steady, like a pulse. Marian signed her name beneath each line of legal disconnection, the black ink curling across the paper with quiet certainty. The office smelled faintly of ink, wood polish, and the faint lavender oil Angela dabbed on her wrist, barely perceptible unless you leaned in close. Kyle's name disappeared, line by line. Angela slid the documents across the table in a methodical rhythm. First, the will. Next, the trust. Then, the power of attorney and funeral directives. Each signature Marian laid down was like closing a door, softly, without anger, but with the latch clicking firmly into place. I've added a clause for any future contests, Angela said as she flipped to the next page. Documented intent, mental soundness. No ambiguity. Marian nodded once. Her lips didn't move, but the corners of her mouth tightened just enough to register. She was still, not cold, but focused. There were no theatrics in revenge this quiet. Only paperwork and resolve. Angela's pen paused. Do you want to name a new contact for your healthcare directive? Dina, Marian said, without missing a beat. Primary, legal, and medical. If there's a secondary needed, leave it blank. Got it. Angela made the edit, fingers flying across the keyboard. The printer hummed, then spat out the fresh directive like a new page in a novel no one else would finish writing. Marian signed again. Her cursive was clean, old-fashioned, the kind taught in schools that no longer existed. By midday, the documents were stacked in a neat pile, each clipped and labeled. Angela slid them into a blue folder and passed it over. But Marian had brought her own, a fireproof binder, padded and locked, tucked into her purse like an old Bible. She didn't just file things away, she archived them. Angela turned to the final item on the agenda. You mentioned a trust edition, Marian nodded. Delayed educational trust. It goes to Benji. He can't access it until he's 25, and his parents have no say, financial or otherwise. Angela raised an eyebrow but didn't ask why. She typed, nodded, and handed over the draft. Is he aware? No, Marian said. And I'd like to keep it that way until it's time. Angela slid the document over. Marian added her signature with the same steady rhythm. A breeze moved through the half-open window, stirring the corner of a paper on the desk. Outside, traffic murmured faintly from the riverfront roads. Somewhere in the distance, a train blew its horn. Inside the room, silence reassembled itself between clicks and signatures. Angela stood. I'll file the revocations with the courthouse this afternoon. Everything will be legally in place by next week. Marian rose slowly, taking the blue folder and sliding it neatly into her binder. The zipper made a low rasp as she sealed it shut. On her way out, she paused in the lobby where a wall calendar showed a peaceful mountain lake. A photo of serenity placed between lawyers, forms, and fluorescent lights. It felt like a small kind of irony. That evening, back in her home, Marian placed the fireproof binder on the top shelf of her hall closet. It sat beside her wedding album and a box of handwritten recipes. She clicked the lock closed and turned the key, slipping it into the ceramic dish where her house keys lived. The sun had dropped behind the pines outside, casting long shadows through the kitchen window. The air smelled like vanilla from the candle Dina had brought over last week. Marian sat at the table, a teacup in hand, her back straight, her breath slow. Her phone lit up beside her plate. A text. Kyle. Sorry about earlier. Let's talk soon? She stared at it for a long time, the screen glowing against the dim room. The words looked small, light, easy to delete, and she didn't type anything back. Not yet. The house was quiet, not lonely, not empty, just silent in the way a room becomes when something heavy has finally been removed. The next morning, she drove to the hardware store, the same one Kyle used to trail behind her in when he was 8, asking for candy near the register. She didn't think about that. She kept her eyes on the wall of mailboxes and picked one with a steel faceplate, a narrow slot, and a lock that clicked like a vault. Installation took 20 minutes. Dina held the instructions while Marion drilled it into the wall just left of the front door. Afterward, they sat on the porch drinking orange sodas from glass bottles like it was 1975 again. "That's one more entry point sealed," Dina said, handing Marion the tiny set of keys. "One fewer place for him to stick his foot in," Marion replied. That afternoon, she updated her health directive. Dina sat across from her, reading aloud each clause to verify. Full exclusion of Kyle Duncan from medical decisions, no access to records, no rights to visitation if hospitalized. It was a cold thing to hear read aloud, but the air didn't feel cold. It felt honest. When it was time to sign, Dina slid the document toward her. "Sure you don't want a secondary?" "No," Marion said, pen in hand. "Just you. That's enough." She scribbled her name at the bottom, under the statement that she'd made this decision with full capacity, under no duress, not even a shadow of hesitation. Over the next few days, Marion worked her way through the list she kept in her planner under the heading Security Reclaim. Replaced every house key, changed the safe code in the closet, wiped the emergency contact on her pharmacy file, switched her banking passwords, and shredded the old passbook Kyle had once used to deposit checks on her behalf. She didn't tell him. That was the point. The new quiet wasn't cold. It was controlled. She opened windows in the morning to air out old seasons, let the curtains billow while she brewed her coffee. Even the chime of the toaster felt different now, more hers. She played records again. Ella Fitzgerald, Dusty Springfield. Nothing loud, just enough to underline the calm. One evening, she sat at the dining table with her brown leather-bound journal, the one she'd never let Kyle borrow in high school when he needed a notebook for debate club. She wrote slowly. "He said it was easier without me, so I'm making it permanent." She closed the journal and reached for her tea when she noticed a small envelope propped against the fruit bowl. Handwritten, no stamp. Just her name in blocky teenage letters. Inside was a drawing, Benji's, unmistakably. It showed a backyard party, chairs and balloons sketched in graphite. In the corner, near a fence, stood a woman holding a pie. The detail in her eyes was striking. She looked like she was about to say something, and chose not to. No note. Just the image. Marion stared at it for a long while, her thumb brushing the edge of the paper. She tucked it into her planner between her will summary and a blank grocery list. The silence held its shape, but a warmth crept in, uninvited and stubborn. 2 days later, the mailbox clinked open and shut. She stepped out barefoot and retrieved a thick ivory envelope. Her name was spelled formally. The return address was Rachel's. Inside, a folded Thanksgiving invitation with golden leaves embossed on the corners. Printed, generic, no handwriting, not even Benji's. She stood on the porch, breeze tugging gently at her sweater, and reread it once. The pie had stayed untouched. The fence still stood. So what had changed? The postmark said 3 days ago, right after Kyle's text. She folded the invitation neatly, then looked out across the street where a neighbor raked leaves into neat, forgettable piles. The silence wasn't hers anymore. Now it was Rachel's move. Marion didn't touch the ivory cardstock for hours. It sat on the kitchen table beside her tea, glowing faintly in the afternoon light, like something waiting to be forgiven. The printed leaves, the elegant serif font, "Please join us for a Thanksgiving celebration," spoke with such artificial warmth, it nearly made her laugh. Nearly. She turned the envelope over, flipped it again, then took a black Sharpie from the drawer. The scent of ink hit her first, sharp, unmistakable. She paused, then wrote across the front in clean block letters, "Return to sender." She tucked the invitation back in, but not before adding one thing more, a neatly folded receipt from Benji's birthday gift. Dated, itemized, still crisp. She slid it in behind the card. A silent record. She didn't write a note. That would have made it emotional. This was procedural. Outside, the air had cooled, and the sky over Eugene wore its November gray like a lived-in sweater. She pulled on a light coat and walked the envelope to the blue corner mailbox 2 streets over. The flag was up. No one saw her drop it in, and that felt right. Quiet revenge preferred no witnesses. Back home, Dina was already inside, sipping from a thermos and flipping through the first of 4 photo albums laid out across the couch. I started with Christmas 2009, Dina said. He's in half of these, but only in the background. Marion set her purse down. Then crop him out. Dina didn't ask why. They worked methodically. A kind of reverse scrapbooking. Pages were peeled apart. Captions were scribbled through and rewritten. Kyle and Rachel became family visit. In group shots, Marion replaced names with generalities. The cousins, guests, laughter. When they reached Benji's toddler years, Marion slowed. In one photo, she was holding him on her lap, her eyes soft, his face sticky with birthday cake. Kyle was at the edge of the frame, holding a plate, looking elsewhere. She tore him out with the edge of a metal ruler. 3 hours later, the albums were lighter. Marion boxed the loose photos and labeled them Archive, Do Not Display. The remaining ones she rearranged on new, unmarked pages, moments that still belonged. She opened the hallway cabinet and pulled down the framed family portrait from Kyle and Rachel's 5th anniversary. One of those professional, overly lit shots from the university photography studio. Everyone posed in fall sweaters. Marion had paid for it. She turned it over, removed the backing, and slipped the photo out of the frame. It made a dry plastic sound as it peeled away. Where to? Dina asked. Donation pile, Marion said, placing the empty frame atop a box destined for Goodwill. By evening, she sat at her desk while Angela typed on the other end of the phone. The soft clicking of her keyboard, a comfort. I'm drafting the estate rationale letter now, Angela said. Intentional exclusion language. Documented contact history, legal disclaimers, psychological soundness. It'll hold. Good, Marion said. I want it filed before the holidays. It will be, Angela replied. And Marion, this isn't petty, it's preventive. I know exactly what it is, she said. After the call, she stared out the window. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting soft halos onto the damp pavement. A few houses had their Thanksgiving lights up early. Turkey cutouts, blinking orange bulbs, plastic pilgrims. It all felt like theater now. A staged warmth she'd sat in the audience of for too long. Her phone buzzed. One message. Benji. Thanks for the gift. I kept it hidden. She didn't smile, but her hand lingered on the screen. Upstairs, she added the estate rationale letter draft to her fireproof binder, filed behind the trust update. She double-checked that the Benji trust form was intact and labeled. It was. A soft mechanical click echoed as she sealed the lockbox shut again. That night, as she poured herself a glass of water, the landline rang. She froze. 3 rings. 4. She answered on the 5th, the receiver cool against her cheek. Kyle's voice came through, flat but uncertain. Mom, what's going on? She didn't respond. Not yet. She just listened, the quiet stretching out like the distance he'd created, now echoing back to him in full. She deleted it. Now the silence wasn't grief, it was strategy. Marion moved through her home like someone resetting a house for winter. Every draft sealed, every creak memorized. Angela arrived just after lunch with a flat black briefcase and a neutral expression. Rain tapped gently at the windows, rhythmic and unbothered. The whole city seemed to be holding its breath. I brought the second round, Angela said, unclipping the case. This one ties off every thread. They sat at the dining table, the same place Marion used to wrap birthday gifts. Now it held only legal forms and cold, neat paperwork. Angela pulled out a document stamped Amendment to Power of Attorney, Immediate Revocation. This strips Kyle from all prior permissions, not just moving forward, but historically. The bank, the hospital, the county, all notified. Marion signed without hesitation. The pen didn't waver. Angela passed another. Updated directive at Sacred Oak in Riverbend. You're now listed as having no immediate next of kin involvement. Dina's the only contact on file. Marion signed again. Her hand didn't shake, but her breath caught, just once, just enough to notice. Next was the safety deposit authorization. He tried to access it 2 days ago, Angela said, sliding over the new lockout confirmation. Didn't get past the first screen. I'm not surprised, Marion murmured. That account always meant more to him than to me. Angela sealed the documents in an acid-free sleeve and tucked them into a red folder. We'll file today. You'll be unchallengeable by tomorrow. Marion rose, took the folder, and walked it to her fireproof safe. The dial spun with a satisfying click. This was no longer damage control. It was architecture. The next morning, Dina appeared in her raincoat, holding a single sheet of paper like it was coated in something foul. Guess who's trying the back door now, she said, dropping it on the kitchen table. It was an email, printed and highlighted. Hi, Dina. Hope all's well. Marion's behavior has changed quite a bit. We're worried. She's cutting us out, and it's just not like her. Has she been okay? Has anyone evaluated her? Just want to make sure she's safe and not being manipulated. Rachel Marion stared at the words for several seconds, then poured herself a cup of coffee. No sugar, no cream. She thinks I'm being manipulated because I finally said no. She thinks you're being dangerous because she's out of control, Dina muttered. Want me to reply? No need, Marion said. Just send it to Angela. Let her log it. The kettle continued to hiss behind them. Outside, wind bent the trees low, rattling the dry limbs like something that wanted in. That afternoon, Marion prepared a small package addressed to Benji. No return name, just her tidy handwriting. Inside, a full set of art supplies, all premium brands, each piece wrapped in recycled paper. She included a charcoal kit, soft pastels, a proper sketchbook. No message, no note. She wrapped the box in brown paper, sealed it tight, and walked it to the post office herself, letting the clerk weigh and label it without explanation. Back home, she placed her keys in a new drawer, labeled the safe again. Checked the trust account balance, steady. Her planner was still open on the kitchen table, today's task already crossed out in clean black ink. Finalize revocation. The phone rang just after 5. Not her landline, her cell, a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was Lane County. She answered, more curious than cautious. Hi, this is Carla with Adult Protective Services. We received a wellness referral for a Marion Duncan. No major concern, just a standard follow-up based on a submitted report. Is now a good time to talk? Marion turned slowly toward the window. The porch was slick with rain. Her reflection stared back from the glass. Composed. Ready. They're trying every angle now, she said quietly, mostly to herself. She smiled, not kindly, and answered, Yes, now is a perfect time. Marion straightened the stack of documents one last time. Her binder sat open on the dining table like a courtroom exhibit. Tabs sticking out in careful order. Directive, trust, capacity, power of attorney, healthcare proxy. Every label was dated. Every page notarized. Outside, the porch was still damp from last night's rain, and the trees dripped like they were trying to whisper. At exactly 10:07 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Marion opened it slowly. The woman on her porch had a clipboard, a tote bag, and the kind of cautious smile that tried too hard not to offend. Her badge read Carla, Lane County APS. Ms. Duncan, she asked, thanks for taking time to meet. I'm just following up on a wellness concern submitted by a family member. Marion stepped aside and held the door without speaking. Her silence was permission, not warmth. They sat in the living room, the fireplace unlit but clean. Carla pulled a form from her clipboard, smoothing it with her palm. Marion offered no coffee, no chit-chat. She simply opened the binder and pushed it gently across the table. Before we begin, Marion said, you'll want to read that. Carla blinked but nodded. Her eyes scanned quickly. When she hit the signed letter from a licensed therapist confirming Marian's mental capacity and sound judgment, she slowed. "Do you mind if I ask when this evaluation was done?" Carla asked. 3 months ago, Marian replied. "Preemptive. I anticipated being called irrational." Carla looked up. "You don't seem irrational." "I'm not. I'm thorough." The room settled into stillness, broken only by the occasional scribble of Carla's pen. "Your estate documents are all in order," Carla said, "and you've clearly taken steps to document your decisions. I've also documented the pattern of being excluded from family gatherings. That's in the appendix." "You think this report was retaliation?" "I know it was," Marian said, with a crispness that stopped further questions. Carla hesitated for a second. Then she offered a small, resigned nod and closed her folder. "I'll log the visit as complete," she said. "No concerns. I'll also note the possible inheritance motivation behind the report. We're required to flag that now." "Of course you are," Marian said, rising to walk her to the door. They exchanged no goodbyes. Carla's heels clicked down the front steps and disappeared with the breeze. Dina arrived an hour later, toting a brown bag from the co-op and a newspaper folded under one arm. "How'd the performance go?" she asked, dropping apples into a bowl on the counter. She didn't ask anything I hadn't answered already. Dina pulled out a container of soup and set it on the stove. "They didn't care if you were okay. They cared that they're out." Marian didn't argue. Instead, she pulled a single sheet from her drawer, the final amendment Angela had couriered over that morning. A clause titled, "Final Beneficiary Nullification, Posthumous Rights." It was only 1 paragraph long, but it made things airtight. Kyle would have no say, no right to object, intervene, or contest her estate upon her death. It revoked every unspoken social assumption that came with being next of kin. She signed it at the kitchen counter where she used to prep Thanksgiving stuffing. Angela filed the completed clause later that evening. A scanned PDF popped into Marian's inbox just after 6 p.m., followed by a text that simply read, "Filed and sealed. You're unshakable now." She was halfway through washing a pot when her phone buzzed again, this time from a notification she didn't expect. "Kyle Duncan has made a post." She tapped, just once. Hardest part of being a parent is getting cut off for trying to protect your family. No one prepares you for that kind of heartbreak. Beneath it, a photo of Benji as a toddler sitting on Kyle's shoulders. The post was already out there, liked, shared, pitied. What Kyle didn't understand was that attention didn't equal truth, and sympathy, it didn't hold up in probate. Marian didn't need to respond. She filed it, quietly. Not with a lawyer or a threat, but with a pen and a plan. That morning, she spread her documents across the table like a strategist mapping out the next move. The obituary draft sat in the center, red pen in hand. She crossed out every default phrase. "Beloved mother. Survived by son. Family will gather privately. Gone. In their place, a clean line. Survived by friends and those who chose to stand beside her." She revised it 3 times, then emailed the update to Angela for pre-filing. Within the hour, she received confirmation. It would be sealed and stored in the trust file, released only upon death. Like everything else Marian had touched lately, it was controlled, irrefutable. By mid-afternoon, she logged into her medical portal and began updating her emergency contacts one last time. Kyle's name had been removed weeks ago, but there were still old records buried in specialist forms and outpatient referrals. She scrubbed them all. Everywhere the system asked for next of kin, she entered Dina's name with full legal authority. When the final form was submitted, she closed the laptop and exhaled. It wasn't relief, it was reinforcement. Her phone buzzed softly. "Benji, you okay?" She stared at the message for several seconds, then typed slowly, like each word needed approval. "Marian, better every day." She hit send. No punctuation, no elaboration. He'd understand the rhythm. Outside, the sky had cleared after a long morning of drizzle. The light turned everything silver. She opened the window in the sunroom and let the breeze in. Dust lifted gently from the curtain hem, stirred by air that felt clean. An hour later, a knock sounded at the door. It was Ellen Rowe from the Eugene Historical Society, her wool coat dusted with lint and rain. "Marian," Ellen said, setting her bag down. "We're digitizing local collections for the Centennial Project. You mentioned having neighborhood archives?" "I did," Marian said, stepping aside. "Come in." She brought out 2 shoeboxes from the front closet, each filled with decades of snapshots. Backyard barbecues, downtown parades, block parties, birthdays. All on film, some faded, some vivid. Ellen removed her gloves delicately. "These are incredible, some of these faces. This is real local memory." Marian nodded. "You can take them, but with one condition." Ellen paused, caught off guard. "What kind of condition?" "No names," Marian said. "You can label years, streets, events, but no personal identifiers, no family ties. Nothing that anchors them to any narrative but place." Ellen blinked, then nodded slowly. "Understood. Anonymous archives." Marian handed over the boxes. "Let the photos speak. Don't let them tell lies." Once Ellen left, Marian returned to the dining table. The surface now felt strangely bare without the binders. Her legal war was nearly over. The estate was sealed. The power had shifted. And yet, a strange emptiness lingered, like a chair pulled out and never filled again. She poured herself tea and watched the sunset crawl across the wood floor. Then a shape moved across her porch. At first, she thought it might be the mailman doubling back. But then she saw it, the pie, held in 2 hands, aluminum tin glinting under porch light, a white cardigan sleeve brushing the edge of the glass door. Rachel, standing like someone about to deliver penance. Her hair slightly frizzed from the rain. Eyes shadowed beneath too little sleep or too much guilt. Marian didn't know which, and didn't care. She stayed back from the door, the heat of the tea radiating into her palms. Rachel didn't knock. The pie remained untouched. For a moment, it seemed like Rachel might turn around, but she didn't. She stood there, waiting. Marian took 1 step toward the door. Just one. Enough to look her in the eye. And then she reached out, not for the handle, but to draw the curtain closed. Rachel looked up. "Hi," she said, voice too bright. "Can we please talk?" Marian didn't move from the threshold. Her body filled the space, hand still resting on the inside of the door. Rachel's smile faltered slightly. "We miss you," she added. The "we" hung in the air like a rope someone was trying to pull her back with. Marian didn't bite. "You're on my porch," Marian said calmly. "That's already too far in." Rachel looked down at the pie, then back up. "I know things got complicated. Kyle's not perfect. Neither am I. But we didn't mean to hurt you." Marian raised her eyebrows, once. Rachel fumbled forward. "It's the holidays. Benji keeps asking why you haven't come around. I just thought maybe—" "No," Marian said. "You didn't think. You orchestrated. There's a difference." The wind picked up. Rustling the leaves piled at the foot of the steps. The porch light buzzed faintly, insects orbiting its soft yellow glow. Marian's house smelled like cinnamon and paper, baked apples cooling in the kitchen. A stack of documents still open on the dining table behind her. "I'm not interested in performative peace," Marian said. "No more invitations. No more staging." Rachel's jaw tensed. It wasn't staging. It was just boundaries. Marian let out a breath, not quite a laugh. "He told me to stay out of family gatherings. You supported that. So I am." She adjusted her grip on the edge of the door, steady and slow. "I'm not angry, Rachel. I'm precise. You drew a circle and left me out of it. Now I'm drawing mine." "We didn't think it would go this far," Rachel said, the pie trembling slightly in her hands now. Marian's voice softened, but it lost none of its clarity. "That's the thing about fences. They keep things out and in. You and Kyle made your side. I've simply stopped trying to crawl over. For a second, Rachel looked like she might speak again, but instead, she nodded, as if remembering too late that Marian had always been the one who listened longer than most people could handle. I didn't bake it, Rachel said, holding out the pie like a peace offering she knew would be rejected. I know, Marian replied, and gently closed the door between them. She locked it. Then she turned, walked back to the kitchen, and poured herself a cup of tea. The sound of the kettle, the weight of the mug in her hand. Everything felt right-sized again. She didn't look out the window to see if Rachel was still there. She didn't need to. The pie was never meant for sharing. It was a guilt token, too sweet, too late. That night, the wind rattled the branches outside her bedroom, and somewhere in the distance, a garbage bin tipped over. She slept soundly, the door locked, the house quiet, but in the morning a letter arrived. No return address. Hand-delivered. Legal envelope, crisp and thick, tucked in her mailbox like something meant to rattle her. She opened it with a butter knife, careful not to tear the contents. Inside, a formal notice. Notice of intent to contest. Power of attorney filings. Filed by Kyle Duncan grounds. Questionable mental capacity. Coercion by third party. Unjust exclusion. Marian folded the letter neatly and laid it on the table. So this was his next move. She walked to the closet, unlocked her binder, and slid the notice into the section labeled Contested Claims. Anticipated. Then she picked up the phone and dialed. Angela, she said, voice calm. It's time to go louder. The legal notice sat on Angela's desk for all of 5 minutes before she snapped into action. By the time Marian arrived that morning, the response was already drafted. 7 pages with exhibits, timestamps, and a certified letter from the clinical psychologist who'd evaluated Marian's mental state back in June. Angela slid the folder across the desk without ceremony. It's dead on arrival, she said. 0 legal standing. The trust is sealed. Your capacity is documented, and his name doesn't appear on a single current document. Marian flipped through the pages, reading slowly. It was all there. Call logs, signature audits, witness affidavits. A paper trail so airtight it might as well have been bulletproof. He's fishing, Angela said, but the water's dry. Marian closed the folder gently. Then let's drain the rest of it. Angela nodded. Time for the house. By noon, Rick Mason, a notary Marian had used for years, was at her dining table, stamping page after page as Marian signed the final documents, transferring her home into an irrevocable trust. Once filed, it would be legally untouchable, not contestable, not reversible. Your house is now a fortress, Rick said, handing over the signed copies. Only Dina can authorize access after you're gone. Marian took the papers and slid them into her binder without comment. The smell of ink and toner still clung to them. Finality had a scent, sharp and chemical. That afternoon, she walked into her credit union on 13th Street, where the tellers still knew her name and asked about her garden. I need to close all active personal accounts, she told the branch manager, and open 2 new ones, under trust designation. The woman hesitated. Do you want your son listed as backup? Marian met her eyes directly. No. Within the hour, new accounts were created. Dina listed as co-trustee. Kyle's name purged from all records, including access history. 1 more door, sealed for good. Back home, Marian watered her pothos plant, swept the entryway, and returned the fireproof binder to the top shelf of the hall closet. Her house felt different now, not just quieter, but stronger, as if it had finally chosen sides. Around 4:30, she heard footsteps, soft, deliberate. She opened the front door just in time to see Benji walking down the sidewalk, hoodie up, backpack slung low, hands jammed into his pockets. He didn't look back, but Marian noticed the corner of an envelope sticking out of the mailbox. She waited until he turned the corner, then stepped outside. The envelope was plain, sealed, her name written in the kind of print only teenagers used. Half cursive, half block letters. Inside, a single sentence in pencil. Thanks for making me feel seen. No signature, no return address, but it didn't need one. She read it twice, then folded it and slid it into the inside pocket of her binder, not under family or trusts, but in a new section she labeled by hand. Legacy chosen. That night, she poured a small glass of wine, set a record spinning, Otis Redding, and let the dusk settle across her living room like an old quilt. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was peace. Hard-won, full-bodied. Her phone buzzed once, a system notification, update. Kyle Duncan removed from contact access list. Vault Federal Bank. Marion stared at the message, thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just whispered, "Good," and turned the volume up on the record player. She sat at her desk early that morning, lit only by the soft, flickering glow of the desk lamp and a thin slice of autumn light breaking through the blinds. The screen blinked once, then loaded the form, beneficiary update, final confirmation. Marion took a breath. It wasn't like erasing a name from a party RSVP. This was more permanent. A removal from legacy, not a guest list. She scrolled to the field marked Primary Beneficiary, clicked into the drop-down, and selected Remove. A box popped up. Are you sure? This action is irreversible. Her hand didn't tremble. She clicked Yes. The form refreshed. No mention of Kyle Duncan remained. No backup entry. No line to fill again. The account now listed one name only, a trust number tied to the supplemental fund for Benji. She closed the browser and pushed the laptop aside. It was done. Dina arrived just after 10, balancing a thermos, a scanner, and a bag of lemon scones. You look like someone who just canceled Christmas, she said, placing everything on the table. I just confirmed what he started, Marion replied. He left first. I'm just labeling it correctly. They spent the next hour scanning the last stack of hard copies, notarized directives, the amended trust, capacity documents, and funeral instructions. Marion labeled each file as if she were naming chapters: revoked, witnessed, final. Anything else? Dina asked, sliding the final document into the cloud archive. Marion paused, then reached for one more envelope, the original trust draft with Kyle's name still printed in clean block font. She fed it through the shredder slowly, watching the strips curl downward like dry grass under a mower. No, she said. That was the last ghost. That afternoon, Marion hosted a tea in her backyard. A small table, 3 friends, no family. The late sun caught the edge of her teacup as steam curled into the crisp air. A playlist hummed softly from a speaker by the garden shed. Ella, Nora, Otis. Music she'd once shared with Kyle before he started asking her to turn it down. The women laughed, traded stories, complimented her lemon poppy seed loaf. No one mentioned holidays. No one brought pity. It was the most welcome Marion had felt in months. As her guests were leaving, Angela's email arrived. Subject: Final lock. Congratulations. Body Marion. Your legal protections are complete. Everything is filed, time-stamped, and archived. You're fully protected. No one can undo what you've done. Marion read the email twice, then saved a copy to her encrypted drive and backed it up on a USB she kept in her jewelry box. She moved through her house like someone reclaiming it for herself, setting aside blankets to donate, relabeling her file drawers, tossing expired pantry goods that Kyle once insisted she buy in bulk. By evening, everything felt lighter. Before bed, she opened her voicemail folder. Just one saved message. Benji's voice, from last winter. Hey, Grandma, I like the sketchbook. You always get the good ones. Call me sometime? She let the message play twice. Then she reached for her journal, thick, leather-bound, and deeply private. She didn't write every day anymore, only when something settled. She wrote, "He asked me to stay out. I did and took everything with me." The pen paused above the next line, but she didn't write it. The next morning, she was slicing a pear for her oatmeal when her phone buzzed. Not a call, a push alert. Sacred Oak Medical Emergency Contact Request Patient. Marion Duncan current contact unreachable. Confirmation requested for hospital intake authority. Marion set the knife down slowly. The pear juice ran onto the cutting board like a quiet warning. She opened the message. It was automated, but the meaning wasn't. Someone had flagged her as unreachable. Someone was trying to step in. She wiped her hands, unlocked her phone, and called Dina. "We may have a leak," she said calmly, "and someone just tried to walk through it." She didn't hesitate. Under the drop-down, she selected Decline Disclosure. Block access. 2 clicks. 1 confirmation. That was all it took to keep him out of the one room he'd never earned the right to enter. Not with flowers, not with guilt, not with last-minute panic dressed up as concern. Angela called 5 minutes later, voice crisp, unwavering. "I've reviewed the alert. The directive is airtight. Your capacity's on file. Your decision to block Kyle stands. The hospital has no choice but to follow it." Marion pressed the speaker button and walked to the window, watching the clouds roll low over the trees lining the street. "Is this the first time he's tried that?" she asked. Angela paused. "The first official attempt?" "Yes, but these kinds of maneuvers usually come in threes." Marion nodded to herself. "Then let them come. I've bolted every door." She hung up just as Dina knocked, one hand balancing a tote bag, the other holding a bouquet of grocery store tulips. Slightly wilted, just how Marion liked them. "You know," Dina said, brushing a leaf from her coat, "you're officially ghost-proof now." Marion cracked a smile. "And yet you still brought me flowers." Dina flopped onto the couch, pulling out 2 novels and a tabloid she knew Marion would roll her eyes at, because even the heavily fortified need light reading. They spent the afternoon reading in silence, broken only by the occasional comment, a bad line from the gossip mag, a gasp at a plot twist, the sound of Marion's spoon clinking gently in her teacup. By late afternoon, the sky turned amber through the front windows. The light slanted across the wood floors, catching dust motes in the air like snow that didn't fall. Marion stood slowly. "I've got a few things I want to give away." She led Dina to the guest bedroom, the one Kyle used to stay in during college visits before Rachel started calling hotels instead. The bed was still made, but the room no longer felt like it belonged to anyone. Marion pointed to the reading chair, the side table, a vintage lamp with a floral shade. "I called the women's shelter on River Drive. They're sending a van next week." Dina nodded, her gaze lingering on the chair. "That was his favorite, wasn't it?" Marion didn't look at it. "Then let someone use it who actually needs a place to rest." That evening, she sat at the kitchen table with her obituary draft, red pen in hand. Her last revision had felt right, but something still nagged at her, a faint echo of something unfinished. She crossed out the last sentence and rewrote it with sharp clarity. "Survived by friends and truth. No family, no flowers, just facts." She folded the paper and slid it into her binder, just behind her living will. As she set the pen down, the landline rang once. Kyle. Just once. No voicemail. No second ring. A tug on the line that didn't find purchase. She didn't bother checking the caller ID. Instead, she walked to the front porch and sat down on the steps, breathing in the chilled evening air. The wind had picked up. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk in dry, nervous patterns. The mailbox creaked open when she reached for it. Inside was a single white envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just her name, written in a hand she'd recognize anywhere. Slightly slanted, narrow at the edges, like someone trying to take up less space than they deserved. Benji. She stood there on the porch, envelope in hand, the light from inside casting a warm rectangle across the cold boards beneath her feet. She didn't open it yet. Some letters weren't meant to be read in the doorway. Marion stood in the kitchen, envelope in hand, the kettle hissing softly behind her. The flap was sealed with care, not tape. Just a firm crease. No stamp, no return address. Only her name, handwritten with that hesitant slant Benji always used when he wasn't sure if something would be read with love or scrutiny. She opened it slowly, slicing a letter opener beneath the fold, careful not to tear the paper. Inside, one sheet, lined notebook paper, pencil, not ink. I see what they don't. I love you, always will. The words weren't long, but they hit hard. She read it once, then again. Her hands curled slightly around the edges, not clutching, just holding, as if afraid the paper might dissolve. A silence bloomed inside her chest, and for the first time in months, Marian wept, not the theatrical kind. Not the cracked sound sobbing of betrayal or loss. This was quieter, contained, a slow release of something that had been building beneath every clipped signature, every notarized page, every polite refusal and locked door. Her tears slid down her cheek like a confession she'd never said aloud. She hadn't done it just for herself. She had hoped, somewhere deep, that someone would understand. And Benji had. When the tears passed, she stood straighter. Folded the letter gently, pressed it flat, then walked to her desk and pulled out a fresh legal form. By noon, she was sitting across from Angela again, a new folder between them. A supplemental trust, Marian said, her voice steady. Delayed access until age 25. Benji is the sole beneficiary. Angela scanned the page. Same funding source as the original estate. No, Marian said. Separate. This one doesn't replace what's already been done. It adds to it. Angela nodded. And you want to name a co-trustee? Dina, Marian replied. If I'm not around, she'll know how to protect it. The room smelled faintly of cedar from a candle burning behind Angela's desk. Outside, traffic hummed along the river road. Inside, the only sounds were the steady scratch of a pen and the soft shuffle of papers being turned. Angela handed over the final draft. You'll want to include a letter, something personal. I already wrote it, Marian said, and pulled a sealed envelope from her purse. Angela didn't ask what it said. She knew better than to read sentiment meant for someone else. But later that night, Marian opened her copy and read the letter one more time before tucking it into the trust binder beside Benji's file. Dear Benji, I saved the seat for you. It's yours now. Love always, Grandma. She slid the trust document into the safe, filed under a new tab she labeled Legacy, Unspoken Promises. Dina came by the next morning to witness the secondary signatures. You're still crying proof, right? She asked with a teasing smile, already knowing the answer. Marian handed her the clipboard. The flood passed. I'm in the rebuilding phase now. They didn't talk about Kyle, or Rachel, or even the social posts that still hung in the digital ether. Gathering likes and sympathy like lint. None of it mattered anymore. Marian had rerouted the river. Later that afternoon, she received her final quarterly trust statement by mail. Heavy envelope, certified paper, security sealed. She opened it at the kitchen table, where a cup of lemon tea steamed beside a fresh crossword puzzle. Inside, 4 pages, stamped and initialed. At the bottom of the summary, final balance, locked. Access restricted, terms enforced. Beneficiary, Educational Trust, Benjamin A. Duncan. She placed the papers inside her master file. No edits. No corrections. The numbers weren't what made her feel finished. It was the line, access restricted. A door that Kyle could rattle, but never open again. The living room was quiet but full. Papers spread across the coffee table. Envelopes stacked by importance. Marian's binder opened to a page labeled Final Instructions. Execution required. Rain tapped softly on the windows, and the scent of bergamot drifted from her tea. This wasn't sadness, it was strategy. She uncapped her pen and made the last few edits with the same precision she'd used throughout her life, crossing out 2 names from the posthumous contact list, Kyle Duncan, Rachel Duncan no invitation. No notification. No condolences requested. They'd said she made things harder. She would not complicate their grief with the burden of pretending they belonged at her end. Next came the donation instructions. She had chosen the Marion House Women's Center, the same shelter that took her guest room furniture last month. In her final letter, she wrote, "If anyone wants to honor my memory, feed someone who hasn't been seen in a while." Dina would read it aloud at the gathering, a modest tea service, no speeches. Marion wanted something quieter than a eulogy. She wanted honesty, not performance. She turned to the home deed, the final document to file. Angela had helped prepare it weeks ago, but Marion had waited to sign until every other piece was in place. She read it one more time. Upon the passing of Marion Ruth Duncan, the property located at 114 Sycamore Street shall transfer in full to the Benjamin A. Duncan Educational Trust. No waiting, no probate, no legal gymnastics. She signed it, slowly, cleanly, then placed it inside a fireproof sleeve and locked it into the safe. At the kitchen table, she began writing letters, real ones, ink on paper, sealed in envelopes. There were only 3, one to Dina, thanking her for being the friend who showed up when everyone else opted out. One to Angela, brief and practical, with a post-it noting where every backup copy lived, and one to Benji. That letter took the longest. She didn't try to explain everything, just enough for him to know he'd been seen, defended, remembered. She ended it with, "I never left you, even when I wasn't invited." The envelopes went into the black folder marked Personal Deliverables, upon death. She sealed it and set it beside her journal, which she'd left open for one final entry. She paused for a moment, then wrote, "I was not welcome in their family, so I built my own." She closed the journal slowly, then wrapped it in linen, tied with twine, and slipped it into the drawer below the safe. The house had never felt so settled, like it had exhaled. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a gray hush hung over the neighborhood, the kind that made everything feel like it had paused to listen. There was a knock at the door, not urgent, not expected. Marion opened it to find Dina standing there with a paper bag in one hand and a small glass bottle in the other. "Scones," she said, lifting the bag. "Cranberry orange," Marion smiled. "And the bottle," Dina held it up. Dark glass, vintage-style label, handwritten tag. "Indigo ink, the good kind. I figured if you're writing people out of your life, you should have ink that doesn't fade." Marion stepped aside to let her in. "You're right on time." They sat by the window, spreading jam over warm scones and talking about nothing. Trivia, crossword puzzles, whether or not to finally rewatch Rear Window. After Dina left, Marion opened the ink and tested it on thick paper. It was smooth, deep, final. She rewrote one address label, just one. The envelope to Benji. The old pen had started to fade, and she didn't want it to look careless. She tucked the newly labeled letter back into the folder, fastened the button clasp, and set it beside her tea. She looked around the room once more. Every photo accounted for, every page in its place. There was nothing left to cross out. Only one name remained, and it was the right one. She signed the final codicil just after sunrise, the light slanting through the kitchen blinds in thin golden ribbons. The document sat between her tea and her morning pill organizer. 1 page, 4 sentences. The last addition to a story told entirely in ink and absence. She signed her name in deliberate script, pressing hard enough to leave an impression beneath the paper. Then she exhaled. Not relief, not triumph. Just air, finally released after months of holding still. The house was silent except for the ticking of the hallway clock and the distant hum of sprinklers kicking on across the street. She gathered the codicil and slid it into her binder. With both hands, she closed the cover and secured the elastic band around it. Then she reached for a white label, already written in clean black ink, completed. She pressed it to the spine and stood there for a long moment, fingertips resting on the edge of the binder like it was a sealed vault. In a way, it was. Every secret, every decision, every correction of history, all protected now. An hour later, she stepped out of the house wearing her light jacket, walking shoes, and a scarf knotted at the neck. She locked the door behind her, double-checked it, and tucked the key into her coat pocket. The river path was nearly empty, just a few joggers and an older man walking a three-legged golden retriever. The scent of damp earth and pine filled the air, along with the occasional waft of fresh coffee from the cafe near the water's edge. Leaves crunched beneath her feet, brittle and satisfying. Marian followed the path until it curved near the overlook, where the city had installed a line of benches, each one etched with brass plaques for loved ones lost, families remembered, names preserved in small, quiet ways. She found the one she'd selected 6 months ago. It faced the water, where the current moved slow and silver. Her plaque had been installed 2 weeks earlier, small and centered, in memory of Marian Duncan. Seen, prepared, free. She sat on the bench slowly, feeling the warmth of the morning sun rise up through the metal slats. She didn't think about Kyle, not anymore, but she thought about Benji. His name had been entered into her will with care, listed once but meaningfully. It didn't appear under assets or property distribution. It appeared in a section titled Legacy, above a paragraph that began, "For the one who chose to see me when others chose not to." Angela had called it unorthodox but enforceable. Marian called it true. Back home, the house welcomed her with its usual hush. It no longer felt like a place waiting to be visited. It felt lived in, known. The dishes were done, the linens folded, the fireplace clean. Every drawer had a purpose. Every file was where it should be. She placed the binder back in the safe, locked it with quiet finality, and ran her fingers along the edge of the journal still tucked beside it. From the kitchen came the soft ticking of the clock. Outside, wind nudged the chimes that hung from the eaves, setting off a gentle melody that sounded like memory but didn't ache. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching a blue jay hop between the branches of the old dogwood tree. The air smelled faintly of cloves and paper. The house was full, but not of people. Full of decisions, boundaries, peace. She had built something here, not to punish, not even to protect, but to reclaim. Every document, every line. Every silence she refused to fill with apologies. Her phone buzzed once on the counter. A weather alert. Possible fog tonight. She turned it over without reading more. Outside, the wind shifted. And inside, the quiet stayed intact. She looked around the room once more, then smiled. Not wide, not loud, just enough. Then she whispered the line she had written months ago, but only now felt ready to say out loud. My son said, "Stay out of family gatherings," so I kept him out of my estate.